Welcome back to episode 6 of Measure What Matters. So we're diving directly into chapter 2, focus and alignment. As luck might have it, very, very important with regards to where you're going as a company, where you're steering specific teams. So in the context of the book, Measure What Matters, which is me, Mehdi, and Ped, currently discussing it today, we've got this very interesting quote around ruthless prioritization. Put more wood behind fewer arrows. This is sometimes very hard for us to do within an organization, especially when you're sort of a team lead as well, because you get handed instructions that essentially you need to be able to sort of support with execution from your teams. What is interesting for me when it comes to OKRs is that it essentially emphasizes the point that you can't do everything all at once. In the real world, everybody lives in a community within your organization. Your team lives with constraints. If you're honest about those constraints, you realize that you do need to do some sort of prioritization. Now, the question becomes, how do you do that prioritization? For example, there's a very interesting part of how Google put its sort of like Chrome first push into play. How did they manage the teams? What kind of OKRs were they looking at? And I mean, the constraints there were severe. I mean, you had the browser wars going on at that stage. I mean, browsers were the be-all end-all. This was a massive, massive revenue stream for so many different companies. And on the back of that, you also had the constraint of the 2008 recession that essentially hit as well. So talk about a time to do very, very, very ruthless prioritization. The book goes sort of into that between 2008, 2012, how Google essentially navigated that period as well. And I mean, we all know where that ended up. And say that Chrome is the backbone of most of the browsing engines currently on the internet. But it highlights a very important fact for us. Given a set of constraints that's relevant to us within an organization, to team leads, to team members, to executive board leaders, we need to say no to be able to do the things that matter. And I think OKRs from the book gives us a good primer of how that can potentially be done with some practical examples. And then the question to you would then be, where has saying no to something essentially paid off for you and your team in your past, or maybe even in the near future?
Well, I don't know if this aligns exactly to the spirit of saying no in order to focus, but saying no in order to innovate. I have an example from many, many years ago. When I worked for Monster in the US, we acquired the domain and brand for jobs.com. If I'm not mistaken, it was like an $800,000 purchase. And it was basically just, and so back then we were flush with cash and big company growing, et cetera, et cetera. But then the marketing folks and various other people all had these ideas of what to do with it. And while we were waiting for them to formalize what to do, a couple of us techies that kind of had a better idea of what could be done, because all what they were thinking of was mostly in terms of what content do we put up there and how do we make it a call to action, bring people to Monster. And they were thinking more in terms of using it as an advertisement platform, right? To bring people, fun people into Monster. So what we ended up doing is looking at jobs.com. We said, hey, our competitor at that time, our second biggest competitor was HotJobs. There's a whole story about HotJobs and Monster's history going back. But at that point, they were a pretty big competitor. And now we own jobs.com. And we kind of looked at each other like, should we? Yeah, okay. So we set up a subdomain called hot.jobs.com. And then we looked at HotJobs URL structure and replicated it and basically just, made it so that the search brought you into Monster, et cetera. And we confused the search engines and we basically destroyed HotJobs. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this publicly, but I think the statute of limitations has passed and I wouldn't get in trouble for it. But that was it was literally something we did over a couple of hours and it killed. It absolutely throttled traffic from that domain into Monster. And, all the requests from everyone else, all the other departments kind of just went away because they didn't want to disrupt that utilization. Now down the road, we were able to do things like make it dynamic so that hot.jobs.com still did what we set up originally, but we set up a DNS wildcard so that anything.jobs.com would then take that anything and first see if it's a location, then apply it as a location filter. If it's a category, apply it as a category filter. Otherwise, apply it as a keyword filter. And then that had a big knock-on effect of bringing people into Monster from
Yeah.
SEO, purely
Yeah.
SEO. So this is stuff like I'm not poo-pooing on anyone in marketing or anyone in other departments in the company, but I struggle to believe that if we were just handed over requirements, that these would have been those requirements. I think you have to kind of know tech and the potential for it and be given a little bit of space to kind of operate.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was us saying no to them, but we only were able to say it because we didn't have OKRs back then. We're only able to say no is because we did what we wanted first, right? So we got away with it.
I completely agree as well, because it's very interesting for me within the structure of OKRs, as it's talked about within this book, is that there's a focus on squads, in our case, techies, owning their OKRs, or at least a partial part of their OKRs, because I think, Mehdi, you mentioned this in the previous chapter as well. OKRs are not just top down, but they're sometimes also bottom up and a little bit sort of horizontal as well. And I think, Ped, you've also mentioned this before in conversations, is that once teams have that, it gives you a bit of freedom to say no to certain things and then essentially focus on something that could only be from a techie perspective, where you have that intrinsic knowledge and then applying that perspective to then push your OKRs, which makes it so multifaceted, because now you don't just have a marketing professional or sales professional within your organization driving growth, but you now also have someone that understands something like SEO on a technical bit that can say like, okay, cool, I've got an idea. I think it can make a difference. Let's try it out and see what happens. What do you reckon, Mehdi?
Yeah, totally agree. Like, this aspect of the focus in OKR is quite significant boost for the organization. Like Steve Jobs mentioning, innovation means saying no to 1,000 things. Like, everything to say yes to, it means you say no to several items. You need to be really careful what you say yes to. The aspect of alignment between this framework also, it goes in hands with focus, because when the focus of the organization on something, you know that this is a focus, and if, like the example that Pet mentioned, you can leverage that focus into your advantage easier and more effective, why not? But that transparency need to be there. Let's say if the tech team was not aware of that change and that purchase, they never could come up with such an idea, right? And that is the tools that it gives you, the focus and alignment. The organization is supposed to be aligned in order to make it work. And also, like Andy Grove mentioned, if we try to focus on everything, we focus on nothing. The focus is really important. It's main purpose of this book, and this framework really is an enabler. And when it's come to objective, usually it lasts for quite long time. But when it's come to a key result, they know it's living, breathing thing, and they adjust the same things that Pet mentioned in the previous chapter. Is the agile aspect of it. If they see it's not relevant anymore, they are not going to proceed with it. And the way that's, like John Doerr was mentioning, our goals are servant to our purpose, not the other way around.
Even with OKRs, I think that a lot of people doing OKRs, maybe not for the first time, but early on in their journey, struggle with the saying no, because as human beings and as partners in a company, we naturally want to do more, right? It's not ever been described as a bad thing to be able to do more. But I think the flip side of that, when I used to ask guys to write their OKRs, I always shared mine and said, this is not a, waterfall trickle down. This is just me sharing with you to inspire you. And if something I have on mine inspires you, go ahead and copy it word for word if you think you can help out in a massive way. But if not, if there's other areas, but you think you can align to other people's OKRs or have a novel one of your own. But I always used to say, try to keep it, I'm okay with one objective, because we did OKRs quarterly. I'm okay with one objective this quarter. 2 is I'm all right with as well. 3 is really pushing it, but I really don't want to see more than 3 objectives. And then the same thing, each one shouldn't have really more than a couple of KRs, because what are you really doing, right? Like, how are you going to accomplish? If that KR is something you're going to achieve overnight, don't even write it down. Just go do it, right? Yes. But if it's something that you need others to be aware of, and you need, hey, I got to have time to focus on this. This is going to take some heavy lifting. That's a good, solid KR. And if it stretches you, even better.
Mm.
So that mentality of getting people to say no to themselves, I guess that's the hard part, because you want to believe like you can do it all, right?
I mean,
first you have to be a little self-aware.
Yes, that's the social contract as well, because like it or not, we're all sort of like in it together. You know, we spend 8 hours a day within an organization at minimum, just trying to do something together. And it is super fulfilling if you get to achieve something as a sort of community of people. But it's also almost more detrimental if you don't feel that what you're doing is currently sort of impacting it. So interesting one for me is over a couple of beers with a good friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned the book, Measure What Matters. And I'm like, I'm reading all about OKRs. OKRs are very, very interesting. Gives me something new to sort of talk about, a new frame of reference, because I've never worked in a company that has it. And he looks at me and goes, what's an OKR? And I'm like, well, it's like a KPI. And he's like, okay. And the distinction is, if you were to like formally define it, I was like, okay. So a KPI, KR, and an OKR. And I was struggling with it a little bit until I started sort of like unpacking, getting a little bit further in the book. And because this is the world that I live in, the analogy for me almost came up like, if you're driving a car, KPIs are whatever you see on the dashboard. It's something that's constantly tracked there. It gives you a general indication with regards to what you're currently doing. But a KR essentially gives you the road that you're driving on. It's got a very specific direction, and your objective is the destination that you essentially want to reach. And I think when I broke that down for me as a data professional, I tend to confuse these things quite a lot, but it adds these different levels of abstraction. And you know, it's hard within teams, because once you've got a dashboard of 20 KPIs, anything red becomes something that immediately needs to be addressed with that very much a firefighting sort of approach to it, where I feel that when I look back at my history within data platforms, there's certain points in times where I think OKRs would have been very, very beneficial to me to use, especially like you said, Ped, when you then need to motivate your team, motivate your executives with regards to a very strategic investment of not just effort, but then also money, and then keeping it very concise with regards to prioritization, keeping it, you know, to that 1 to 2 level barrier with a set of KRs associated with it. And I've unfortunately seen it multiple times where you've had an executive step in with a very clear vision of what objectives they want to chase, but then get lost in this massive set of KRs with supporting KPIs that at the end of the day, the message or the objective essentially gets so diluted and so convoluted that multiple teams just don't understand how they're working towards this objective by doing this very siloed approach. So I definitely resonate with you, Dave, with regards to prioritization. It's not just what you're doing, it's what you're measuring while you're doing it. That's also important, because you have to drown out the noise, because it just takes up so much attention. How have you experienced it, Mehdi?
I totally agree. Like when it's come to focus and being really aligned within the organization, it's quite important. And so many organizations doesn't really get it well. There is this book called The Four Discipline of Execution by Chris McChensley that describe how what you measure is important. And sometimes what you measure, it's too late for you to make a move on it. Let's say the example that they was mentioning within the book, you want to lose weight. If you weight yourself, it's already too late. If you gain weight, it's already too late. You cannot do anything about it.
No,
right?
now you're shattering my reality. Mehdi, come on.
And let's say it was mentioning what you need to measure is the calories that you use, the exercise that you make. And these are the things that you need to measure. And it's the difference between what you are measuring and what is your result. And OKR also really enable you to go that direction, to put your focus on something that gives you the objective that you want. And that focus, that laser focus for you, it's quite important that, hey, this is the focus that it gives me. This is the alignment that I need from the rest of the organization. Hey, this is the direction. And in one part of the book was mentioning when you use OKR, you can use it to communicate with your other department in a less charged way. Instead of saying, hey, I'm lagging behind because of you, you just say, hey, my KR is at risk, I need your assistance, and make it much easier to communicate with other department and bring that, you're not in silo anymore, and it bring that kind of collaboration spirit within the organization to make that objective happen.
Yeah, I think that is a very, very good point, because anything measure related in a meeting sometimes can turn a little bit confrontational. And I mean, the question here for you, Ped, would be, is there a significant difference that you found in practice between having tough conversations when OKRs are the context, or having tough conversations when, like you said, nothing / KPI is the context with regards to that?
I think KPIs are in a lot of ways a safety net for a lot of people. The way that those, typically there's a tiered grading structure, right? Like you exceed or meet the goal, all these different grading mechanisms. And a lot of people find cover in that they're typically written, those goals are set usually in a way that keeps the individuals safe under most bad outcomes. Whereas with OKRs, we're saying, look, they're aspirational, so expect bad outcomes because they are aspirational, but let's free ourselves to try to hit some of these massive targets by decoupling, like we said before, decoupling compensation or let's say annual appraisals or anything like that away from the OKRs themselves. So I guess the tough part for me, typically, if you look at focus and alignment, it's coming into agreement with all the stakeholders, people in various departments that your work has to align with on what is really important for you to focus on. And you're going to hurt some feelings. And that's a difficult conversation sometimes,
right?
Going into the planning, right? So even in those situations, one thing that I would advise people in leadership positions to be aware of, because the book and most people mostly focus on focus and alignment and saying no, there is a third option when you are in leadership, and that is to delegate. Right. If there's a department that really believes in something, but you definitely can't focus on it because you have more important things that you have to deliver or you have to focus on. If you're a leader, there might be an opportunity for you to carve out a certain person or a certain group within your organization and say, okay, you guys take this on, please, for this quarter, this time frame. And then that way you kind of, I don't know, maybe trying to satisfy two things at once. But I think what gets lost in the message here is that focus is really targeted for an individual or an individual team. But when you have a large organization with multiple teams, perhaps there are different focuses for different teams. And you as a leader of all those teams combined, you may have to break some of these rules and carry, many more objectives than what you would recommend for your team members, for example, right? But in that, to summarize just real quick, what I'm trying to say is really it's focus and alignment, and a tool that you can use for that is delegation. If you're in a position to be able to delegate.
Good point. And I think, Mehdi, when we look at OKRs, we have different kinds of OKRs, and it would be quite interesting for me to sort of understand a little bit how these two play against, or how these different types of OKRs essentially play against each other. And, where at what stage of a company there's maybe a different mix of these. So when we talk about something like aspirational OKRs, I think aspirational OKRs being tied primarily to a bit of like R&D as well. When you're trying to push for a new market, that's going to be freaking awesome, I think. What do you reckon, Mehdi?
Very true. But one thing that it was really interesting in this book for me, they was mentioning Google take the OKR and scale it to different level. Like Andy Grove introduced this OKR model, but Google take it to whole new level. They divide it to two different category of OKR. That is commitment OKR and aspirational OKR. Commitment OKR is the things that they really committed for, and 1.0, which means hit the target, is something that they expect. If they cannot meet it, they need to have the postmodern and describe what went wrong, whether they was doing the measurement wrong, whether the expectation was too much, or what went wrong, and they need to do it in the postmodern. But they have another type of OKR, aspirational OKR, which they expect to miss, and it's about 40% miss is acceptable because they intentionally set the bar so high, and when achieve it, overachievement means overachievement in those kind of situation that, hey, we set it so high and we reach it, that means overachievement. And this differentiate between these two kind of OKR. And then there is a risk that John Doerr was mentioning, that you need to be careful if you categorize aspirational OKR as committed OKR. People, they don't buy in. They say it's not achievable. This is not realistic. And the other way around, if you categorize committed OKR as aspirational, people, they don't take it seriously. They say, okay, if we miss it, is okay. That's why this is really important to which category you put your OKR in, and whether you want to have that aspirational OKR in the first place or not. There are some model, there are some example within the book that they was mentioning. They were more into committed OKR up until they get to some stability. Then they go for aspirational OKR, but they were never as aspirational as Google. Like for the browser example that you was mentioning, the first aspirational OKR that they put was 20 million user. The second one was 100 million, which they sit together and they make it 110, and they manage to hit that number. When you want to go that aspirational OKR, you need to be careful what you're doing, that not disappointing people, not really give them something that, hey, this is not achievable, this is not realistic. Make them understand this is part of the game. We want to set the bar high and see whether we want to achieve it.
Agree there. I mean, Ped, have you found a situation where an aspirational OKR just gave this laser focused for the team, where they were like, yeah, we really, really want to do this. Even if we don't make it, holy crap, we really want to give this our focus and see if we could make it happen. Because it would just be cool.
I can give a couple of examples. My favorite one is one where we were utilizing one of the major cloud providers, and utilizing them at a very high rate. Let's say probably in the top 5 biggest customers that they have in Malaysia. Coming from another company previously where we weren't nearly as large of a customer, but we got much bigger discounts, I started to question, like, what are we doing wrong here? Not just much bigger discounts, but like that former company essentially had the same number of active users and similar number of, transacting users per day, et cetera, but somehow there was a 10-to-1 ratio. And I was just trying to figure out, like, what's going on here, right? What are we doing? So I made it a very aspirational OKR to cut 90% of the budget. Now, in reality, for me, internally, that was a commitment goal because I knew it could be achieved. And I'd come from a place where it could be achieved, but I couldn't go out there and say, hey, 90% savings in a couple of quarters. So essentially what happened was these guys, they focused on infrastructure. They focused on, are they doing the right things in terms of spot instances versus reserve versus, whatever other mechanisms they had to save money, all the basic stuff. But what they didn't do, and what I helped them do, is bring in the AWS people into our building, explain the way of the world that we're spending this much money and you guys are not giving us the right discount. And if you don't give us the right discount, we're multi-cloud and shift our workload to other clouds that are going to give us a discount. And when you twist arms like that, so the funny thing is that the reason they knew I was serious is because I'd done that before with that company. And the way I had done it was I threatened the same thing, but they were like, yeah, whatever. You're never going to, it's too much of a cost. So funny enough, I got in touch with their competitor who happened to be a Formula One sponsor that year. And I think they may still be. And, discussed maybe signing up, and they were like, oh, that's awesome. And as part of their sales and marketing, they asked me to come down to Singapore for the F1 race. And I set up an Instagram account. It's still there, specifically so I can take pictures with this company's logo at F1 saying, thanks so much for, the trip to F1. It's awesome, blah, blah, blah. That Monday after the race, I got a call from our cloud provider saying, good news, we got your discounts approved. So they knew it could be done. And long story short, with these guys, the discount was eventually applied. Our savings weren't exactly 90%. I think they were closer to like 40%. And it took a couple of quarters to get there because it wasn't all through discounts. It was also other things at our disposal that we had to do. And I think that even continued beyond then. It set up a culture of FinOps essentially within the DevOps team. So that's one example. Another example is more towards having this culture of, we said before, bottom up or even horizontal definition of KRs, right? So I work for a company called Photobook. Shout out to Photobook. I love those guys. They had a tough time. I was there around, I think it was 2000 or 2001. I'm getting old. My memory's fading a little bit, but they had a really tough time with some flooding at their factory, right? Big factory, huge facility, very large industrial printing machinery, very, expensive stuff there. And there was a flood and everything got destroyed, and the company could have easily gone down. Easily. I mean, there was insurance, but insurance takes a long time to kick in. And then you lose all your customers who are transacting with you because they're still going to print. They're just going to go to somebody else.
Massive disruption in your supply chain, right?
Massive, massive disruption to everything, the basis of the company. And what I'm reminded of is how everybody across every single team, after we got over the initial emotional, had to deal with it, right? It's a psychologically difficult thing to realize a company that you've worked for years is at risk of, imploding because of a natural disaster. So after that emotional, dealing with it, we got to a place where, okay, let's just align. Our objective is we survive. Now, everyone do whatever you can. So there were guys like who normally write code, right? They might be in the factory helping me move servers into the headquarters office so we could plug them in there because there's no power in the factory anymore for those servers. There were people who were creating a schedule of loading our jobs onto giant hard drives and taking them to other printing facilities because we didn't have the network capacity at the HQ to move the jobs in between. And everyone did everything. We let our customers know, our leadership team, marketing, the CEO spoke to the customer and said, look, we have to explain, we just had a natural disaster. Please bear with us. And they all stuck with the company. They're like, we'll order even more, just let us know when you're ready. And so having people who are so versed in objectives, I imagine in a KPI world, it would have been a different conversation. Been like, all right, we need to survive. And it would have been a million conversations of what do we do? What should I do? What do you want me to do? What can I do? Right? Like almost none of that happened. Everyone immediate was like, I'm used to writing my own KRs anyway. I know what's missing in this part that I have control over. I'm going to go do that. And when I run out of work, I'm going to go talk to someone else and say, hey, what are your KRs? Well, how can I help you? Right? Like it was, I think OKRs, that's why I love them so much is it was an example of it actually saving a company, like literally saving a company. These are a couple of examples of, where I've seen it be a little bit more difficult or easy one way or the other, but objectives, key results to me, if companies aren't practicing, there's good reasons sometimes where you can't practice it, right? You have other restrictions that you have to abide by. But if companies aren't practicing it where they could, I think they're missing out.
It's the alignment component for me, which is so important here as well. It's like, yes, it gives you prioritization, but then that shared understanding, that shared community with everybody sort of pitching in and doing their part to do it is amazing. It's really, really powerful. Yeah, I completely agree. That's a very interesting example with the natural disaster because I'm always stuck in a bit of a data world and I never really think of nature doing her own thing as well. And that's also something that you've got to like really, really pull together to sort of like work around.
Right.
Absolutely
And
lovely.
also in crisis management that you mentioned, it's Andy Grove also have a quote that bad company destroyed by crisis, good company survive them, and great company improve by them because they bring them together. They really use whatever they have in their arsenal of tools to make things happen and bring them even closer together. This is something that you can see as side effect of OKR. Intel have been in this kind of situation a couple of times and they survive it, I think, because of these tools in their arsenal that they could use and bring people together to use it.
I think we've covered this maybe a couple of times in previous episodes maybe as well, but when we talk about something like honest communication, which is for me a foundational element of sort of prioritization, it is so interesting to see that when you are honest to that extent, not just with your employees, but also sort of the clients that you serve, how willing they are, well, not just willing to accept the fact that you're going through some difficulty, but then actually willing to sort of support you through that journey as well. I think we don't normally think about that. We are very biased to be, well, at least I am, to the negative aspect where you guys go like, no, never going to do this. I'm out. Cheers. Goodbye. But if you never put that communication out there, and I think this is for me also one of the cool things about OKRs is that you're able to communicate that it's bound, or the framework or the concept is essentially wrapped up within this communication layer of being very transparent. This is also kind of like very, very cool superpower. Thank you very much for joining us for chapter 2. So we talked a little bit about focus and alignment and the books that you can have a look at is currently on the description field. You can find it, the Goodreads links as well, just below. And we're going to head off into chapter number 3. See you in a moment.
Thanks, everyone.